Today we're going to show how to do an easy mitered border on a basic quilt. Oftentimes when you have a border that has stripes in it, if you do the typical blunt sewing of your border, the corner is not nearly as pretty. So by taking the stripe running this way and the stripe running this way and then creating a diagonal miter, it gives your eye a much more continuous bend around the quilt. When you put a border on a traditional quilt, we usually have our border equal to the side of the quilt. But when we do a miter, we need extra fabric. And an easy way of figuring that out is to simply measure the width of your border. This border here is 7.5 inches. So what we did was we made certain that we had more than 7.5 inches hanging off of the edge of the quilt. So on this easy technique of mitering a border, the very first step that we're going to do is we need to draw a dot 1/4 of an inch in from both edges of the corner of our quilt. The easiest way of doing that, and certainly the most accurate way of doing that, is to take a rotary ruler and line the rotary ruler up so that we have the 1/4 inch mark lined up here and then the 1/4 inch mark lined up there. And then we can simply take a washable marker and make a mark right at the tip of our corner. It's important to be accurate and actually put this to a ruler. And we want to do this on all 4 corners of the quilt before we get started stitching on our borders. When sewing on your first border on the quilt, you're going to place your border with the right sides facing up and your quilt with the right side facing down. You're going to start on the dot on the far corner, and as we come to the next dot, we're going to stitch till we get to the dot. So as we're stitching, I'm running my 1/4 of an inch foot along the edge. And you want to try and have a presser foot where you can see right to the needle. On this foot here, I have a nice hole here, and I can actually see my dot. I've come exactly to my dot, and then I'm going to press my reverse button, and I'm going to back stitch 3 or 4 stitches, and then come forward. It is very important that you don't go past the dot. This isn't a hard technique, but you need to be exact. Once you're done, you can then cut your threads, pick up your foot, and we have our first seam sewn to the border. Now we're going to switch and we're going to do the border on the other side. Now when applying our second border, once again, we're going to have the right side of the border facing up, and we're going to have the right side of the quilt facing down. But now we have our first border here. So what we want to do is we just want to take that and push that away. Make sure that you don't get anything trapped underneath that could possibly get caught and sew a little pleat. So organize it, find your dot, and we're going to place our fabric under the foot with the dot right in the opening of the presser foot. Our goal is to actually put our needle through that dot. So I like to do what I refer to as a chicken little. And so what I do is I hand turn the needle down to make certain that I'm going to be right where I want to be. We're then going to start stitching. We're going to do about 2 or 3 stitches, and we're going to go back and hit our reverse button. And we're going to reverse back, but we don't want to reverse back beyond the dot. So be very careful with that. And then we're going to continue to sew down. And just like on the first step, we're going to sew all the way down, get to our dot, do a reverse stitch, and you'll continue to do this on all 4 sides of the quilt. When you've completed all 4 borders on the sides of your quilt, examine the corners to make certain that you really stopped and started right at the dot of our that we had marked. If you've stitched a little bit beyond it, take your seam ripper and remove those stitches and then do another back tack over. But our goal, as you can see, is to come right to the dot and start right at the dot. You can trim away the little tails to neaten things up, and you can also check on the other side of the quilt, and you should find that your borders come right in to touch each other on the opposite side. Now, once we have sewed each border to the dot on the main part of the quilt, I usually like to lay it out on the ironing board and just kind of hand smooth it to check to make sure that we don't have any gaps at the corner. If that's lined up great, then all we're going to do is we're going to take the first border and we're going to lay that flat. Then we're going to take our second border, lay it flat on top, and then fold it so that it's going right sides together. And really all I do is I take a look at the edges of the border. I want the bottom edge of the border and the top border here to be lined up, and the same thing going to my corner. The only other thing that I'm going to check on is down here at the corner where we sewed to the dot. I want to make sure that that's nice and flat and laying nice. When you're happy with it, we're going to take our iron, and starting from the corner of the quilt, we're going to gently press a crease all the way up to the point. Now, this is where we're actually going to be stitching. So once we have this finished, we're going to open up the quilt, and you'll see that crease line where we ironed from the right side. And we're going to take it and we're going to start pinning right in the crease line. If perchance your border is maybe a darker color and you can't see the crease line well, then before you put the pins in, lay a rotary ruler down and just chalk a line so that you have a nice line to follow. The goal for this is visibility. Make it as easy for you to see as possible. I pin it well, so you'll notice that my pins are almost head to tail all the way along this crease. And I'm going to pin it until I get to the corner where we're touching the quilt. Then we'll be able to take it over to the sewing machine, and we'll sew from the edge, and we'll continue all the way down until we get to our previous point of stitching, which was where the dot was on the corner of the quilt. Now we're back at the machine, and we're going to start stitching on the outside edge of the border, and we're going to head down towards our dot that we previously stitched to. So we'll line up the two edges. We'll stitch along our edge, and you might want to do a little back tack. I'm not a big back tack person when I'm sewing my quilt blocks because usually seams will crisscross and anchor in. But we're going to be doing some binding, and we're going to pin this quilt up, so it's always nice to kind of secure that edge. And we're going to pull out our first pin, and I'm going to follow the stitching line right down the creased line. Most of the time I find on medium value to light value fabrics, I can see that crease line without doing any additional marking. But occasionally on some of the darker fabrics, you may find when you get it under the machine that you can't really see where the crease line was. So you could go back with maybe a white chalk pencil and mark that line just for visibility. Don't think of this as I have a 6-inch border, so I've got a 6-inch seam. Think of this as I've got 6 1-inch seams. Do a little at a time, pulling the pins out just before you get there. Now when we get into the center piece, into the corner of the quilt, our goal once again is to hit that dot. Not go beyond it. If we stitch beyond it, we'll get a little tuck. So we're going to take it, making sure I can see that dot, and be once again very careful that I'm stitching one right onto the dot. So there we're right there. We're now going to take it, hit our reverse button, and once again do a couple of stitch back tack. No 12 stitch back tacks on mitered corners. Cut your thread and remove your miter. And you can now open it up and check it out. And what we're looking for is we're looking so that our corner is nice and flat. Okay? We're also looking to make sure that there's not a hole. If we had not stitched close enough to our dot, we would have a little ventilation in our quilt. We don't want that. Once we're happy with the way the miter is laying, we're then going to take and we're going to trim off the excess of our miter, of our borders. And quite often I'll just take a pair of scissors and trim maybe about 1/2 inch away from my miter. Or you could take this over to the rotary mat, lay a ruler down and trim. Once again, I usually go with a little bit bigger seam allowance than 1/4 inch because we're going to be pressing the seam allowance open, and oftentimes 1/4 inch seam allowances are more difficult to get to lay flat when they're pressed open. So we're back up at the ironing board and we're going to trim away our excess border. So we're going to be about 1/2 inch, and to be really honest with you, I don't get really mathematical. Most quilters can cut a fairly straight line, and close is certainly good enough. So you can remove those extra pieces, and we're going to lay our border right sides facing the ironing board, and we're going to press our seam allowance open. And once again, we are on a bias edge. So it wants to be pressing rather than ironing. You don't want to be doing lots and lots of back and forth on it. Just kind of get it organized and press it down. When you flip it over, you can give a gentle press on the top side to make sure that everything is lining up. And voila, you have your border mitered at the corner of your quilt.